And it's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Mayor Ouyang and former Mayor May, for all the leadership that you gave to make this momentous day possible. I remember 5 years ago when we were here, and here we are now celebrating its 5th anniversary. I have come over the years, and I've been here many, many times now, about a dozen times. I've come to not only be fond of Arkansas, but to love Arkansas, because I have so many good memories, and I've made many friends over the years. And a couple of those visits to Arkansas have been Star Trek conventions. They were lively affairs. Oh, you're a Trekkie right there with clapping. Live long and prosper. And those conventions were of fans of Star Trek, sci-fi lovers, but they also saw something else in Star Trek. The creator of Star Trek set our story 300 years in the future. And he liked to use science fiction as a metaphor for issues of the current times, and that was back in the 60s. And he told us that the Starship Enterprise, that huge disc-like starship, was a metaphor for Starship Earth. And the strength of this starship lay in its diversity, coming together and working in concert to meet a common challenge. It was people from different cultures, different parts of the world, different philosophies, different vantage points, all coming together and working as a team. We had a phrase, infinite diversity in infinite combinations was our strength. The very first time I came to Arkansas was when I was 5 years old, when that philosophy of infinite diversity in infinite combinations being our strength was not true. It was not true because of a historic momentous date, December 7th, 1941. On that day, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and plunged the world into a second world war. And it changed the lives of everyone on this planet. But for one small minority, Japanese Americans, the world changed catastrophically. Overnight, we were looked at with suspicion and fear and outright hatred simply because we happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. We were Americans. My mother was born in Sacramento, California. My father was a San Franciscan. They met and married in Los Angeles. And my brother and sister and I were born in Los Angeles. We were Americans, but we were people that looked like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. This nation was swept up in war hysteria and racism. And yet, despite that, young Japanese Americans, like all young Americans, rushed to their recruitment centers to volunteer to serve in the U.S. military. This act of patriotism was answered with a slap on the face. They were denied military service and categorized as enemy aliens. It was absolutely irrational. It was crazy. These were young people, men and women, who were volunteering to fight for this country, possibly even die for this country. And to call them the enemy was crazy. And equally nonsensical was to call them aliens when we clearly were not. We were born here, raised here, educated here. We were Americans. The government went crazy with war hysteria. Then the curfew came down. All Japanese Americans had to be home by 7 p.m. and stay at home until 6 a.m. We were imprisoned in our homes at night. And then we discovered that our bank accounts were frozen. Our life savings was no longer accessible. We couldn't pay our mortgage. We couldn't even get a few dollars from our bank account to pay for daily living expenses. We were financially straitjacketed. And then, on February 19, 1942, the hysteria reached the presidency of the United States. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which ordered all Japanese Americans on the West Coast to be summarily rounded up with no charges, no trial. The central pillar of our justice system, due process, simply disappeared. We were rounded up and imprisoned in 10 barbed wire prison camps, scattered all over the West and the South. Our family was rounded up and put on trains with armed guards at both ends of each car and transported 2/3 of the way across the country to the farthest east of all the camps, Rohr, Arkansas. On that trip, I asked my father where we were going. I said, "Daddy, where are we going?" And he said, because I was a 5-year-old child, he wanted to explain to me in words that I understood. He said, "We were going on a long vacation." And I said, "Well, to where?" And he said, "Arkansas." It sounded exotic to me. A vacation in a place called Arkansas. And I thought everybody went on vacations escorted by armed soldiers. I thought that was the norm. We 3 days and 2 nights, and we arrived at Rohr. I saw the barbed wire fence, but Daddy said we were going to a camp, and so I guess, they have barbed wire fences at camps. And there were people already there waving at us as the train rolled past the barbed wire fence. I still to this day remember that barbed wire fence. I also remember the sentry tower with the soldiers with rifles watching over us. I remember the searchlight that followed me when I made the night runs to the latrine. I thought it was nice that they lit the way for me to pee. It was a totally different reaction that my parents had. It was degrading, it was humiliating, and it was debasing. They hated it. But a child is amazingly adaptable. What would have been grotesquely abnormal became my normality behind those barbed wire fences. It became normal for me to line up 3 times a day and eat lousy food in a noisy mess hall. It became routine for me to go with my daddy and my brother and bathe in a mass shower. And it became normal for me to go to school in a black tar paper barrack and begin the school day with a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I could see the barbed wire fence and the sentry tower right outside my schoolhouse window as I recited the words, "With liberty and justice for all." That was my first Arkansas experience. After the war was over and we were released and my parents struggled and got back on their feet and we were settled in a 3-bedroom home back in Los Angeles, I was a teenager by that time. And I became very curious about my childhood imprisonment. I became a voracious reader. I read many, many history books. I couldn't find anything about my childhood imprisonment anywhere in any of those books. But I also read civics books, and I read about the shining ideals of our democracy. And I couldn't connect that to what I knew to be my childhood imprisonment. And the only person I could ask about that childhood imprisonment, was my father. So after dinner, I had many discussions with him. about our internment. Some of those discussions got quite heated. I said, "Daddy, that was wrong. I would have organized my friends and gone downtown to the federal building and protested." My father said, "Yeah, you probably would have done that." But think about it. Think about it. I had to worry about you, your mother, your brother, and your sister. If I did what you said you'd do, and I went downtown, they were pointing guns at us. If something happened to me, what would happen to you and your mother and your brother and sister? I understood that, but I said, "But Daddy, it's against American democracy." There is no one more arrogant than an idealistic teenager. I gave my father a hard time, but I learned about American democracy from this man who suffered the most, who bore the pain and the sense of loss and the rage and the degradation of the imprisonment most. And yet he was able to explain to me that our democracy is a people's democracy. The ideals of people's democracy are shining ideals. You read about them in your civics books. All men are created equal, endowed with an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is a people's democracy, and the people thought of those ideals. But the people are also fallible human beings. They make mistakes. And because we are fallible human beings, a democracy is dependent on people who cherish those ideals and actively participate in the process of democracy, actively engage in a participatory democracy. And to let me understand what that all is about, one Sunday afternoon, he took me downtown to the Adlai Stevenson for President campaign headquarters. And there he introduced me to how participatory democracy works. There I was with other passionate people, intensely dedicated to get Governor Stevenson of Illinois, a great man and an inspiring, soaring orator, elected President of the United States. We worked hard. We campaigned hard. But Governor Stevenson didn't win. But he said, in a people's democracy, you never give up. You keep on keeping on. And I became active in electoral politics. I also became active in social justice campaigns, the civil rights movement. During the Vietnam War, I was involved in the peace movement. And in the 70s, when a movement began to get an apology and redress for the unjust imprisonment of Japanese Americans, I became active in that. I testified at the Congressional Commission gathering information on the internment. And more than 40 years after the imprisonment, the President of the United States, President Ronald Reagan, signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 and officially, on behalf of the government of the United States, apologized for that incarceration and pledged a $20,000 token redress for all those who were alive at that time of the signing of the bill. In my family, my father, who suffered the most, had passed 10 years before. He died never to know that there would be an apology. I'm sure that that would have been something that he would have cherished very much. But this nation, this democracy, can be big enough and confident enough to recognize a mistake and apologize for it. It is a country that can do great things as well as do great harm. But My second visit to Arkansas, after that first visit, came many, many decades later in 2004. I was the chairman of the board of the Japanese American National Museum, which got my $20,000 redress payment. We founded this museum to institutionalize, to make a part of American society the story of the Japanese American experience, and particularly the internment experience. We became an affiliate of the Smithsonian. And in 2004, we worked in partnership with the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And our partner is with us this afternoon. She isn't up here, but she's somewhere out there, Dr. Johanna Lewis. And we sent exhibits from the Japanese American National Museum, and Dr. Lewis created, I think it was 3 exhibits on the Arkansas camps, and we opened that over a period of 1 week. And on that visit, on my second visit to Arkansas, we made a pilgrimage to the 2 Arkansas camps, Rohr and Jerome. And I visited that cemetery for the very first time, because as a child, I never visited the cemetery. And I was deeply moved. There were people who were born in the 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s. Elderly people, frail people. Some were very sick people who were dragged out of hospitals, and they couldn't take the harsh life behind those barbed wire fences. And they died in the camps. And there was their marker. I also saw markers that said infant Yamada, infant Tanaka, infant Ito. Babies were either stillborn or who died in childbirth and never got a first name. I saw them again this morning as we visited the camp. But the most moving thing for me was this crumbling concrete pylon that was a tribute to the young Japanese American men who were drafted out of that prison camp and put into a segregated all Japanese American unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They chose as their regimental motto, "Go for broke." They were sent to the battlefields of Europe and sent out on the most dangerous missions. They were treated like cannon fodder. Waves and waves of Japanese Americans that went into the fight and often paid the highest price. Despite that, they fought with incredible courage and indeed great heroism. They fought fiercely. And when the war ended, they had sustained the highest combat casualty rate of any unit of comparable size. And they came back as the single most decorated unit of the entire Second World War. It is an amazing story. This story on that visit in 2004, I made many friends. Dr. Johanna Lewis, who's here with us, is one of them. The couple that drove us down here today, Richard and Barbara Young, are very good friends. We visited with them many, many times. We made friends with people like Dr. Sybil Hampton, who was at that time the president of the Wynn Rockefeller Foundation and funded a good portion of that project. We called it Life Interrupted. She became a very good friend, and we visited with her quite often. And we met and became friends with Skip Rutherford, who today is the dean of the University of Arkansas Bill Clinton College of Public Service at the Clinton Library. He was one of the leaders who helped elect an Arkansan, your former governor, Bill Clinton, as the President of the United States. I had the honor of being appointed by him to a federal commission, the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission. And via my service on that, Brad and I got invited to a state dinner, which was a heady experience. And we became great supporters of Bill Clinton. And when the plan to build a library in Little Rock came up, we were happy contributors to that campaign. There's a brick with our name at the Clinton Library. And we came back to Little Rock to celebrate the grand opening of the Clinton Library. It was a cold and wet day.
It was.
We were freezing, sitting with everybody, just like you folks there, on a folding chair in front of the library. Brad kept grumbling about his feet getting numb, and his hands had no feeling. And I told him, I have a little bit of Arkansas in me. I'm strong. I'm going to last this out. But when the singer Bono came out and started singing When the Rains Came, that was it. I couldn't take it either. We discreetly sneaked out, and we watched the opening of the Clinton Library, warm and comfortable in our hotel room on television. That was the best way of seeing it, I think. But again, that made me think. The state of Arkansas, where I was imprisoned as a child, produced a president of the United States. America is an amazing country. That president appointed me to actively participate on the level of the federal government. This is an amazing country. And as I stand here today, I remember 5 years ago when I came to McGehee for the opening of this museum that tells this story, our story. And by our, I don't mean Japanese American. It is our American story that we tell in this wonderful adaptive reuse of a historic building, the railway station that used to connect McGehee with the rest of the world. And this city, this town, is sharing this story with the rest of the world. And you're all here to learn, but also to rededicate ourselves to the premise that this should never happen again. Because the story of the internment of Japanese Americans that happened 76 years ago is very relevant to our times today. It is so timely when we, again, are going through a different kind of chaos, but with the same broad brush that characterized us 76 years ago as potential spies, saboteurs, fifth columnists. Now it's this broad brush that characterizes a whole religious group, the Muslims, as potential terrorists, or immigrants coming from the South as drug dealers, rapists, and murderers. That mentality must not prevail. And I'd like to think that this country has advanced. When that man that occupies the White House last February signed an executive order, which we call the Muslim travel ban. We demonstrated that the country has changed. Thousands of people all across the country rushed to their airports all over the country to protest that executive order. Lawyers went to the airports to offer pro bono services to immigrants coming here. And the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Sally Yates, said that she will not defend this executive order. We have advanced as a nation in 76 years. What has not advanced is the man that occupies the White House. He is a disgrace to this country and our history. And this museum, when we celebrate the 5th anniversary together here, is dedicated not just to sharing a history lesson, but a lesson that we have got to use. This museum here is a museum for the future, looking to the future, that America is a better country than what it was, and that we have learned the lessons that's taught here, as well as what we are going through today to build a better America. And so in the spirit of Star Trek, we will boldly go on to build that future. And on this 5th anniversary, I wish the World War II Japanese-American Internment Camp Museum that it live long and prosper. Thank you very much.